The ship glided through the emptiness of space, its hull catching faint light from a dying sun. The humans aboard stared at the planet below. From orbit it looked broken, like a scar in the middle of a forgotten galaxy. The oceans had dried, the land was cracked, and the cities that once stood proud were now nothing but skeletons of stone and metal. The silence of the world was unsettling. It felt less like a planet and more like a tomb. The crew exchanged uneasy glances because the readings were strange. Faint signals pulsed from beneath the surface, too weak to be natural. Something was alive down there, something hidden. Captain Arik, a man who had seen more than enough battles, leaned closer to the screen. His eyes narrowed as he watched the energy traces. They flickered like the last breaths of a dying fire. His instincts told him this world was not as empty as it seemed. He ordered the ship lower, through the thin atmosphere until the ruins filled the viewport. Towers leaned like broken bones. Streets were choked with dust and shattered monuments stood as reminders of a forgotten pride. There was no sound, no movement, and no life. At least not on the surface. The humans landed near what looked like the remains of a great capital. The city stretched endlessly, yet every building was hollow. They walked through streets where shadows stretched long and heavy. The air was dry and heavy with age. It carried the smell of stone that had been left to rot for centuries. No birds, no insects, no signs of nature reclaiming what was lost. It was as if life itself had abandoned this place. Yet the deeper they went, the stronger the signals became. They came from underground, beneath layers of dust and ruins. They found an entrance to an old passage. Its doors had rusted and half collapsed, but the energy signature pointed there. With effort, they forced their way inside. The darkness swallowed them whole. Their lamps cut across walls covered in strange carvings, symbols of a language they could not read. Each step echoed like thunder in the silence. The air was colder inside, filled with a dampness that spoke of water trapped in stone. The passage twisted downward as though guiding them into the heart of the planet. At last they entered a chamber. The lights revealed figures huddled in the shadows. For a heartbeat, the humans froze, unsure if they faced enemies or ghosts. Then the figures stirred. They were thin, too thin, their limbs fragile and shaking. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting pain and fear. These were not warriors. These were survivors. Their skin was pale and cracked, their breath shallow. They looked at the humans with disbelief, as if they were staring at a vision they had once prayed for but never expected to see. One of them stepped forward. He struggled to stand upright, his body trembling, but there was strength in his gaze. He spoke, his voice broken and strange, a tongue half lost to time. At first the humans could not understand, but then the meaning became clear. His words were not of anger, not of warning. They were words of surrender and hope. He bent his knees, pressing his forehead to the cold floor, and the others followed. The sound of dozens of frail voices filled the chamber, whispering a single word repeated again and again. It was not the name of their own race. It was the word for protectors. The humans felt a weight pressed down on their chests. These creatures were not just survivors of a ruined world. They were the last of a forgotten people, waiting for someone, anyone, to save them. Yet how could they have known to call the humans protectors? Captain Arik felt unease crawl through him. It was as if these survivors had been waiting for humanity, as if the arrival of humans was not chance but fate. The team began to share food and water. The survivors devoured it with desperate hunger, their thin hands trembling. Tears ran down their hollow faces as warmth returned to their bodies. Some of the younger ones clung to the humans as though afraid they would vanish like a dream. The chamber echoed with a sound that had not been heard here for centuries, the sound of life returning, however faint. But even as the humans tried to comfort them, unease grew. Their instruments detected signals beyond the planet, faint but clear. Ships lurked in orbit, hidden in the dark. Whoever they were, they had not interfered yet. They only watched. The silence of the ruins no longer felt empty. It felt like a stage, and humanity had just stepped into the center of it. Captain Arik knew the galaxy was vast and cruel. He knew that no one gave kindness without cost, and no empire spared the weak. Yet when he looked at the survivors, he felt something he had not felt in years. He felt responsibility. He ordered his crew to secure the chamber, to bring supplies, and to treat the survivors with dignity. These people had been left to rot in darkness, forgotten by the galaxy, but they would not be forgotten by humanity. Outside, the ruins loomed under the weak light of the dying sun. They stood as monuments of a tragedy the galaxy had chosen to erase. But for the first time in centuries, something different stirred among them. A promise had been made in silence, not spoken but carried in the actions of the humans. The forgotten race would not remain alone. Yet far above, hidden eyes continued to watch. The humans did not yet know the truth. They did not know why this race had been abandoned, why their name had been erased from history, or why other powers now waited in orbit with silent intent. But they could feel it, the weight of a secret, the pull of something far greater than chance. The ruins were silent, yes, but in that silence echoed a warning. Humanity had entered a story older than itself, and the first chapter had only just begun. The ruins whispered with life again. The survivors, weak and trembling, slowly began to trust the humans. They accepted food, water, and warmth with gratitude that bordered on worship. Children clung to the uniforms of the crew, their hollow eyes filled with tears as they tasted real food for the first time in years. Some of the elders tried to speak. Their voices cracked and rough, weaving fragments of history in a language the humans struggled to understand. Piece by piece, through gestures and scattered words, the humans began to form the picture of a race erased from time. Once, these beings had ruled not just a world, but many. They had been builders, creators, dreamers of stars. But their story turned into silence when the other empires turned against them. Betrayal, war, and a campaign of erasure had followed. The survivors called it the Dark Culling. Their fleets had been burned, their cities shattered, their name removed from every record. It was not a defeat. It was an attempt to erase their very memory. The humans listened with growing unease because this was more than history. It was a warning of how the galaxy treated those it feared. Captain Arik stood among them, his jaw set. He was not a man who spoke easily of emotion, but even he could not hide the fury in his eyes. The other empires had chosen silence and abandonment. They had left these people to die, starved in the shadows of their own ruins. Humanity was the first to come, the first to look into their eyes and see more than ghosts. He looked at his crew and saw the same fire building in them. They had discovered a truth the galaxy wanted buried, and now they had a choice, to leave or to stand. The choice was made the moment one of the alien children placed her fragile hand in his and whispered the word, "Protector." Arik ordered supplies brought from orbit. He sent word back to the fleet. This world was no longer forgotten. It was under the protection of humanity. His words were not shouted, not wrapped in pride, but spoken with the quiet weight of a man who had already decided. Yet in the galaxy, quiet words carried power. Above the planet, the Watchers stirred. Ships hidden in the void began to move. Signals were sent across star channels, carrying warnings that humans had broken the old silence. Soon the first of the patrol ships arrived. Dark hulls gleamed as they descended through the weak atmosphere, their weapons alive with menace. The survivors trembled at the sight. They knew those ships. They had seen them before, always bringing fire and death. Their whispers filled the chamber again, this time with fear. They begged the humans to run. The lead vessel opened a channel. Its commander appeared, his face twisted with arrogance. He looked at the humans as though they were children who had wandered into a war they could not understand. His voice was smooth but filled with mockery. He demanded the humans leave at once. The survivors, he said, were cursed, a broken people that the galaxy had already judged. To shelter them was to defy the will of the great empires. He warned that humanity was young and small. If they refused, they would be crushed as easily as dust beneath steel. Arik did not flinch. He let the commander finish his speech, then spoke with calm. He said the survivors were no longer alone. Humanity had found them, and humanity did not abandon those who sought safety. The commander laughed, a cold laugh that echoed in the ruined skies. He promised that soon the humans would understand their mistake, and with a gesture the alien ships rose back into orbit. They did not fire, not yet. They only left the heavy shadow of threat hanging above the world. The humans worked faster. Supplies poured from orbit, shelters were built among the ruins, and medicine was given to the weak. The survivors watched with disbelief, their hope fragile like glass that could shatter with one strike. Some of them could not stop asking the same question: why? Why would humans risk so much for strangers? The answer was simple, but it was also everything. Because humanity knew what it was to be underestimated. Because humanity had fought to rise from its own ruins time and time again. Because to turn away now would be to lose the very soul of what it meant to be human. But the days that followed were tense. Every night the sky filled with the faint glow of alien ships watching. The humans felt the pressure, a weight that grew heavier with each passing hour. They knew war was close. Yet they did not speak of retreat. Instead, they reinforced their ships, checked their weapons, and prepared for the storm. The survivors noticed this determination. For the first time in centuries, they allowed themselves to believe in something greater than survival. They began to speak of future instead of ending. When the first attack finally came, it was not with thunder but with silence. A fleet descended, dark as night, weapons primed. The humans gathered their ships to meet them. The survivors huddled underground, hearts pounding, prayers whispered into the stone. They feared they would once again lose everything. Yet in their fear, they remembered the word that had spread among them since the humans arrived. Protectors. It was more than a word now. It was a promise. The two forces faced each other in the void above the ruined world. On one side, fleets polished by centuries of domination. On the other, humanity, smaller in number but burning with a will that no empire had yet learned to measure. For the survivors, time seemed to stop. Their fate, once sealed in silence, now balanced on the edge of fire. And in that moment, as the stars filled with enemy light, they understood something that shook them to their core. Humanity was not afraid. The battle had not yet begun, but already the galaxy had changed. The skies above the ruined planet burned with the light of enemy engines. The alien fleet spread out like a storm, their formation perfect, their numbers overwhelming. Each ship carried weapons that had destroyed countless worlds before. Their commanders spoke with the confidence of predators who had never lost to prey. They believed this would be no different. To them, humanity was just another young species that had dared to step where it did not belong. Their voices over the channels were dripping with arrogance. They mocked the humans, calling their weapons crude, their ships outdated, their courage nothing more than foolishness. On the ground, the survivors trembled. They had seen this before. They had seen fleets arrive in the sky, bringing fire and ruin. They clutched the hands of the humans who remained with them, begging them to run, to escape while they still could. But the humans did not move. They looked up at the sky and felt the weight of the moment. They were outnumbered, yes. They were outgunned, yes. But they were not afraid. Humanity had always faced storms. Humanity had always been underestimated, and in the hearts of the crew, there was no thought of retreat. There was only the will to stand. The first attack came without warning. A beam of energy ripped through the upper atmosphere, shaking the ruins with its power. Dust rose into the air as ancient buildings collapsed. The survivors cried out, certain the end had come again. But before despair could consume them, the human fleet answered. A flash of light tore through the void, followed by another and another. Missiles streaked forward, their guidance sharp, their force unmatched. They struck the alien shields with precision. Sparks exploded, hulls cracked, and the enemy's confidence began to falter. Humanity had revealed its teeth. In the command ship, Captain Arik stood calm, his voice steady as he gave orders. His crew moved with practiced speed, each one knowing the weight of their task. They were not fighting for conquest or riches. They were fighting for a people who had nothing left but hope. Each shot they fired was more than metal and fire. It was a message to the galaxy. Humanity would not be silent. Humanity would not abandon the weak. The alien fleet pressed harder. Their numbers gave them strength. Wave after wave of fire rained down. Human shields groaned under the strain. Ships shook with impacts. The void was filled with chaos, with light and darkness colliding in violent bursts. Yet the humans held. Their weapons cut through enemy lines with deadly precision. For every human ship that fell silent, 3 enemy ships burned. The arrogance of the alien commanders began to crack. Their laughter was gone, replaced by shouts of disbelief. From the surface, the survivors watched the sky. They saw fire bloom among the stars. They heard the distant rumble of explosions carried through the air. And they realized something they had never dared to believe. The humans were not breaking. The humans were fighting back, harder than anyone had ever fought for them. Some of the survivors wept openly, their voices raised in cries that echoed through the underground chambers. For the first time in generations, their cries were not of despair but of hope. The battle grew fiercer. The enemy, desperate to crush this defiance, unleashed weapons that could shatter moons. Great beams of energy lanced across the void, ripping through space with terrifying force. One struck a human vessel, splitting it apart in a burst of flame. For a heartbeat, silence fell in the command center, but then the humans roared back with vengeance. A colossal missile launched from the flagship, its trail blazing like a comet. It struck the enemy's largest cruiser, breaking its shields and tearing it in half. The wreckage fell into the atmosphere, burning as it descended, a falling star that lit the ruins below. The survivors cheered, their voices trembling with awe. They had thought no one could stand against the fleets of their enemies. They had thought resistance was impossible. Yet here, above their broken world, humanity was proving otherwise. Every explosion in the sky was not just a battle won. It was a promise being kept. Hours passed, though to those who watched it felt like lifetimes. The void became a graveyard of burning ships. Smoke and fire painted the heavens. Slowly, the balance shifted. The alien fleet, once so proud, began to falter. Commanders shouted orders laced with panic. Their ships pulled back, shields failing, engines stuttering. One by one, they turned away, retreating into the shadows from which they had come. The storm had broken, and against all odds, humanity still stood. When the last enemy ship vanished into the black, silence returned. The humans stood among wreckage and ruin, scarred but unbroken. Their fleet was battered, their losses heavy, but they had endured. The survivors poured out of the underground chambers, their eyes lifted to the sky. They saw not ruins, not death, but the light of protectors who had fought for them when no one else would. They fell to their knees, not in despair but in reverence. Captain Arik looked at the broken horizon and felt the weight of what had just begun. Humanity had shown its power, and the galaxy had seen it. The forgotten race would never again be alone, but that protection came with a price. The empires would not forgive this defiance. War was no longer a question. It was a certainty. Yet as he looked at the survivors, their faces filled with hope for the first time in centuries, he knew the choice had been right. Humanity had faced the test of fire, and they had not burned. They had risen, and now, across the stars, their enemies would whisper a new name with fear. The protectors of the forgotten were here, and they would not be silenced. The battle ended, but its shadow stretched long across the ruined world. The humans walked among the survivors, offering food and comfort, yet the weight in their hearts did not lift. They had fought and they had won, but victory had only opened a door to something greater. The galaxy had seen what humanity could do, and now the galaxy would not forget. Already signals raced through the void, carrying warnings to every empire. The humans had taken a stand, and by doing so, they had declared themselves part of a story older than their own. The survivors began to speak more openly. With their hunger eased and their fear softened, they told their history in fragments, as if afraid the very words might bring back the wrath of their enemies. They spoke of a time when their race had filled the stars with light. They had been builders, artists, keepers of knowledge that stretched back further than most empires could remember. Their ships had crossed galaxies. Their wisdom had guided entire systems. But power breeds fear. The others had watched them grow, and instead of seeking friendship, they had chosen betrayal. It began with whispers, with claims that this race held secrets too dangerous to be shared. Old alliances turned into blades. Fleets once called friends became executioners. One by one, their colonies burned. Their leaders pleaded for peace, but the answer was silence and fire. And then, when their strength was nearly gone, the galaxy chose to erase them entirely. Records were rewritten, their names stripped from archives, their monuments destroyed. Not only their bodies, but their very memory was targeted. To speak of them was to risk punishment. They were not just defeated, they were erased. The humans listened in silence. Each word settled heavily on their hearts. They understood now why the empires had moved so quickly when they discovered the survivors. It was not simply cruelty. It was fear. Fear that the knowledge of this people would rise again. Fear that the truth of what had been done would come to light. Humanity had uncovered more than a forgotten race. They had uncovered a secret that the galaxy wanted buried forever. Captain Arik walked the ruins at dusk, his boots crunching over stone that had once formed proud streets. He thought of the battles humanity had fought to carve out its place among the stars. He thought of how often they had been called reckless, dangerous, unpredictable, and he wondered if the galaxy would now treat them as it once treated this forgotten race. Perhaps the promise to protect had not only saved the survivors, perhaps it had bound humanity to their fate. Inside the command center, his officers debated. Some argued they should leave before the empires returned in greater numbers. To stay was to invite endless war, a war humanity might not survive. Others, their voices burning with conviction, argued that leaving now would make them no better than the empires they despised. To abandon those who trusted them would be to betray the very heart of what humanity claimed to stand for. The debate was fierce, the weight of history pressing down on every word. The survivors watched from the edges, their eyes filled with quiet fear. They had seen promises before, always broken. They had seen rescuers turn to executioners when the threat of the empires grew too heavy. They did not speak, but their silence carried its own question. Would the humans be different? Or would they too turn away when the storm became too strong? Arik ended the debate with a single sentence. Humanity had already chosen. They had made the promise. To turn back now would not only betray the survivors, but betray themselves. The crew fell silent, knowing his words were final. They would not abandon those who had been forgotten. No matter the cost, they would stand. Days passed, filled with rebuilding and healing. The survivors began to walk the surface again, their eyes lifting to the sky not with fear but with something close to wonder. Children played in the ruins, their laughter strange and fragile like the first drops of rain after a drought. The humans worked beside them, building shelters and teaching them to use new tools. Bonds began to grow, bonds deeper than simple survival. Yet peace was thin. In the distance, ships prowled the edges of the system, their lights faint but always present. Scouts reported growing fleets gathering in nearby sectors. The empires were preparing, and when they came, it would not be with patrols or threats. It would be with war. The humans knew this and they prepared. They tested weapons, reinforced their ships, and mapped every possible path of attack. They did not speak of fear, but it was there, heavy and quiet. One evening, as the last light of the sun faded over the ruins, an elder of the survivors approached Arik. His body was frail, but his eyes carried the weight of centuries. He placed a trembling hand on the captain's shoulder and whispered of the old secrets. He spoke of technology hidden deep in the planet, relics of a time before the culling, machines that could shape energy, knowledge that could bend the laws of nature itself. The empires had feared it, and that fear had driven them to slaughter. If the humans chose to protect them, they would inherit not only enemies but a burden. Arik listened without interrupting. When the elder finished, he simply nodded. Humanity did not fear burdens. They had carried them before and they would carry them again. But he knew the elder was right. This was no longer about a single people. This was about the balance of the galaxy, and humanity had just placed itself in the center. That night, as the stars shimmered above the silent ruins, the truth settled over every heart. The survivors had been forgotten, erased by history but not lost. Humanity had found them, and in doing so had uncovered a wound in the galaxy's past. The weight of history now rested on their shoulders. The question was no longer whether they would fight. The question was how far they were willing to go and how much they were willing to lose. The sky above the ruined world darkened once more, but this time it was not from clouds or shadows. It was the gathering of fleets, countless ships stretching across the heavens like a wall of iron and fire. Every empire that had sworn to erase the survivors had come. They arrived with banners of power, with weapons that could crack planets, with fleets that had ruled the stars for centuries. To them, humanity was a young voice speaking against the roar of giants. To them, this defiance was not just rebellion, it was insult. On the ground, the survivors felt their hope flicker. They had believed in the humans, but when they looked to the sky now, they saw an ocean of death. Memories of the culling returned. Memories of fire raining down from the heavens, of screams swallowed by silence. They clutched one another, trembling, and whispered prayers. But in their hearts a fear gnawed, that this time would end as it always had, that their protectors would fall and they would be abandoned once again. In the command center, Captain Arik studied the incoming fleets. His face was calm, his voice steady, but the weight in his eyes revealed the truth. The enemy was vast. Humanity's fleet, though strong, was small by comparison. To fight was to risk annihilation. To flee was to surrender the promise. He turned to his officers, his crew, his people, and he spoke with a quiet strength. Humanity had been underestimated before. Humanity had been told it would fail, told it was too weak, too small. But humanity had always risen, and now, with the survivors watching, with the galaxy itself bearing witness, they would rise again. The order was given. Every ship prepared for battle. Engines roared, weapons came alive, and shields shimmered like burning walls of light. Across the fleet, men and women looked at the stars not with fear but with resolve. They were not fighting for conquest, not fighting for glory. They were fighting for a people who had no one else. They were fighting for the promise made in the silence of the ruins. And for that promise, they would give everything. The first strike came from the empires. Beams of energy cut across the void, tearing through the darkness with blinding light. Missiles rained like falling meteors, burning trails across the black. The sky itself seemed to shatter under the storm. Human ships shook, shields flickered, and alarms screamed. But they did not break. They answered with fire of their own. Missiles tore into the enemy ranks. Cannons thundered with fury. Fighters darted like sparks, weaving between giants, striking with precision. Each shot was defiance. Each explosion was a declaration. The battle raged without mercy. Ships on both sides burned, debris falling like stars into the atmosphere below. Entire cruisers split apart, scattering flame across the void. The noise of war carried even to the ground, a deep rumble that shook the ruins. The survivors huddled together, watching the heavens, their hearts torn between dread and awe. They had seen fleets before, but never had they seen anyone fight for them. Never had they seen protectors stand so fiercely when so much was against them. In the thick of the chaos, humanity unveiled its final weapon. From the shadow of the ruined world, a warship emerged. It was vast, larger than any vessel the empires had expected. Its hull stretched like a mountain of steel, its engines burning with the light of suns. It rose slowly, silently, until its shadow covered the battlefield. The enemy fleets faltered. For the first time, their voices over the channels carried not arrogance but fear. They had underestimated humanity once more, and now they faced a force they could not ignore. The Titan warship opened fire. Entire wings of enemy ships vanished in bursts of flame. Its cannons shattered shields that had stood for centuries. Its missiles cut through the darkness like blades of light. With every strike, the balance shifted. The empires pushed harder, desperate to overwhelm, but the humans refused to yield. The battlefield became a storm of steel and fire, but at the center of it, humanity stood unbroken. On the surface, the survivors fell to their knees as the sky burned with light. Tears streamed down their faces as they whispered the word that had become their prayer: protectors. They had thought themselves forgotten forever, erased by history, but now they saw a truth more powerful than memory. They were not alone. Their fate was no longer silence. Their story would live again, carried on the shield of humanity. The battle dragged on, hours stretching like centuries, but slowly the tide turned. One by one, the empires began to retreat. Their fleets, once so vast and proud, broke apart. Commanders who had once laughed now fled in silence. And when the last ship vanished into the darkness, the ruins fell still once more. But this time the silence was not of death. It was the silence of victory. The humans stood scarred, their ships battered, their losses heavy. Yet they had endured. They had made their stand, and they had kept their promise. In the ashes of battle, something greater than victory was born. A bond that would not be broken. Humanity had taken the forgotten into its arms and given them more than survival. They had given them protection, dignity, and hope.